Good afternoon, everybody. This is Matt Kinsman, Head of Content at SIIA's Connectiv Division. Thanks again for joining us today for the Paywall Shift, converting users into subscribers. Paid content is a priority again, and B2B publishers with niche vertical audiences in need of high-value content really have an opportunity that some other general publishers do not. Today's webinar will offer a two-part look at building out a paid content strategy. First, we're going to talk about how to listen to potential customers and build that strategy around customer needs. Then we'll talk about some specific lessons learned by Farm Journal with the launch of their new paid product, Pro Farmer. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our speakers, Dean Horowitz of IdeaSoil, Byron Zanapolo at Signet Research, and Joe May, Marketing Director at Pro Farmer. Guys, take it away.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you, Matt. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I am the one in the middle. This is Dean Horowitz. Byron.
I'm on top.
And then Joe. You want to say hello? Okay, he might be muted. But the three of us are going to walk. Hey, thanks, Joe. Okay, we're going to take you through. Now, it's April 2019. The first quarter of the year is over. There's been a lot of pressure, I've heard, from a lot of different media companies as we continue. And what we feel like now as a media company is like we're a gladiator. We got another gladiator competitor attacking us and then new threats entering in regularly. But the key thing here is our relationship with the audience. That's what saved Gladiator. It's going to continue to grow our businesses. So how did our businesses start? Most of them with print. And we all have heard for the last probably 20 years, print's dead, all those cliches that we just are sick of hearing about. But it is declining, and we're hearing regularly about publications shutting down. And at the same time, the new talk has been, well, it's like vinyl albums. It's coming back. And we certainly believe that there is a place long-term for print. It serves a different relationship and is really important. So when we look at it, and I'm going to hit on a few different areas of our business, Reed Phillips from the M&A firm gave me an idea of what these different areas of our business are selling for in the M&A space. So print, while still vital, is the lowest at a 4 to 5 times EBITDA. Digital. Okay, 20 years, we've been talking about how the business is going to migrate to that and how it's actually going to provide growth. At the same time, we've heard about frustrations about, are my salespeople the right salespeople to sell digital? Should I have a different digital sales force? At the same as that, now we are today where we have an advertiser base that wants a direct relationship with our audience, with their customers, and wants us to provide that. Digital is 10 to 12 times EBITDA. Events. Events are doing very, very well. We all want the TED Talk type event. Great speakers, incredible audience, the go-to thing for that year. And most of our events are more like a classroom. They could be during a trade show, a conference, a roundtable, e-learning. And that's getting 10 to 15 times, a nice profitable area of the business and one that's expanding and has a lot of room to expand. But today we're talking about the paywall and what that means. We have to learn and we have to think through, how do you migrate our audience from one spot to another spot? How do we get them to see the value of what we offer to such a degree they'll now pay for it? They'll move into this new environment. Look, it's getting 8 to 10 times EBITDA, but it's also a pretty fat, usually, EBITDA to begin with. So here we are, the warrior. First, we got to look at our websites. What's the traffic like? If you use a rule of thumb of our subscription bases, let's say 10,000. And traditionally, our pass-along rate is 2.5. So we should at least be having regular users at that number as we're considering this. That audience has to already demonstrate a level of engagement to make sure that this is the right decision. We can't have high bounce rates We can't have small consumption of pages per session. What's going on as well for digital advertising? So for the first time, digital ad spending is more than traditional ad spending, and it's going to continue to increase. 60% or more of that spending is going to a handful of players. Google, Facebook, Amazon. Sure, everybody on this call is aware that Amazon now is going to really beef up its ad-based business. LinkedIn, a very easy way to communicate to the B2B market. So again, 60% in 2019, this year, 83% of digital ad spending will be programmatic. Again, 60% of that 83 is those 5 companies. So that leaves less than 20% for everyone else, media companies and everyone else. Deloitte recently did a study on the future of advertising, and I want to highlight a couple of things. First, to position yourself for the next 50 years, the path forward is not an easy one, and it's not predefined. It'll require a new product strategy amidst greater competition and an increasing aversion to ads. They're saying look at your cost structure because small changes will likely only assist in survival, that you really need to do a major shift with your business to thrive. E-marketer. So when we're talking about paid and paywall, the 2 darlings right now are the New York Times and the Washington Post. In eMarketer, they talk about that Q did a research study and only 14% of the ones that they've contacted have actually paid for local news in some way, either a subscription or donated to it. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody on the call can't be successful. It just means most companies aren't entering into it with a sophisticated attitude and really understanding what their audience. We have another threat, right? Advertisers now want a direct relationship, like I talked about, with their audience, with their customer base and potential customers. So they're becoming media companies. There are tools out there that make it relatively simple today. So while that's a threat, we can participate in providing content and our expertise as a service. Now here's a company, Costantino, and you're seeing 8 covers of their magazines. Magazines are gorgeous. Recently I saw them, or one of them, in an Admirals Club. Really nice stuff. It really fits well with their brand and what they want to create. But while we might help with content, their path is about getting a sale. So the content leads to one of their products as a solution. Another threat, but an area that we're all playing in, is e-commerce. Here's a site that came out of nowhere a couple years ago, and its whole purpose is to bring a transaction. All content leads to the e-commerce part, and they're using sophisticated SEO practices to get you there. So what I put in, what are the best ice cream makers, and I'm going to most likely at some point come to this page and they're going to make money. Not an ad model and not the way we write content or respect our audience traditionally. So what we're talking about is moving from this warrior mode where we're fighting these threats into suburban dad, meditative dad. I don't know if we're going to actually be meditative dad in this kind of environment, but Paywall has the promise of letting us know that we're going to have a predictable revenue flow for the future. So, Apple News. Launched only a little over a month ago and already controversial. Publishers are complaining about formatting, about how little they make. But it is providing access to an audience you might not have right now. Rolling Stone's participating in it, but they're also pushing their own paid subscriptions, including digital. So here you see print and digital editions in just a print edition. And the benefits of doing this relationship is in-depth interviews, music reviews, the things that hopefully will attract the transaction. Wired, what a great opportunity they have. Something like 900,000 paid subscribers. And then when you look on Twitter, you'll see there's 10 million followers. There's a big audience for this that they couldn't capture beforehand. They're giving away print for free though. So best offer print and digital access for $10, digital access only, $10. Then when you go to their website and you're consuming an article, they have the meter, and they're also pushing the transaction as a flash sale for $5. New York Times, a lot of different options and add-ons in the path for the paid subscription. Wall Street Journal, very similar. They're using the $1 to get your credit card and get the relationship going, and then you step up. Okay, so when I'm speaking with media companies, I'm hearing really primarily 4 questions. How do I know if my brand's value is strong enough to transition our audience to paid subscribers? Key question. My content is premium, but is that just our opinion? What content does our audience find worth paying for? What will they pay for a subscription? Do we institute pricing, content access levels, offer the $1 trial, transactional pricing? What benefits will drive paid registration and membership? And once we get them, once you actually have them in, how do you keep them and continue to grow that relationship? These are major questions and fundamental questions, especially when we're forced to look at ad-based products going down as part of our business and getting money from our audience as the must go up part of our business. So the person is going to walk us through how we could hear the voice of our audience and make some of the right decisions, the decisions we want directionally to be successful here. Byron?
All right. Thanks, Dean. This is Byron Zanopoulos. So now that we've identified this opportunity to implement a paywall, we want to be appropriately informed on how to execute on it. So what we recommend at Signet is an end-to-end program that a publisher can use if they're thinking about putting their content behind a paywall. And this is how we've done it. So there are certain studies that should be conducted in preparation for a paywall to assess the level of risk and to assess the health of the brand overall and identify areas of weakness and areas of opportunity so that this can all help in the planning and implementation of your paywall and increase its chances of success. And then there's survey-based subscriber monitoring to be conducted on an ongoing basis after the implementation to track and monitor the individual subscriber sentiment and ensure the continued success of the new paywall program. So we're looking at 4 parts: a brand health assessment, a content needs assessment, a pricing tolerance study, and finally, after implementation, ongoing experience and satisfaction monitoring of your audience on an aggregate and on an individual basis. Now, part 1 is the brand health assessment, and that's exactly what it sounds like. We're going to gauge the level of satisfaction and loyalty to your brand. But that's not all. It not only consists of establishing metrics on a set of KPIs around loyalty, satisfaction, trust, engagement, and others, but we're also identifying the main drivers of that brand health. What elements specifically drive that satisfaction, and how are those elements ranked in the driving of that brand health? And then the third piece is an analysis of competition. So where else can they get similar information? And where can you identify opportunities to put certain types of information behind a paywall so that that value is justified? So let's start with the KPIs. And the first one is a loyalty metric, the most popular loyalty metric by far, being used across all industries at this point basically, and with much success. It's NPS, Net Promoter Score, Net Promoter System, Now, I'm sure most of you are familiar. If you're not familiar with the name, you've definitely seen the question. It's a 0 to 10 likelihood to recommend question, where 0 to 6s are detractors, 7s and 8s are neutrals, 9s and 10s are promoters. Now, the NPS score is calculated as the percent of promoters minus the percent of detractors. Now, as mentioned, this is essentially a loyalty metric. It has some ability to predict growth and churn as well, but in this case, as a KPI, we're using it primarily to measure loyalty. Additionally, we recommend other satisfaction type metrics that we can add as KPIs for satisfaction and credibility and trust. Depending on specific needs, different metrics will be more appropriate than others. The next KPI we'd look at is that of engagement with the brand itself. So how much time are they spending on the website? How frequently are they visiting? What about their e-newsletters and breaking news emails? If you have a social media presence, what's engagement like there? And for a print publication, metrics like the number of issues read regularly. Now, moving on to the drivers of satisfaction and brand health, we look at brand image. Now, brand image is usually approached as a grid question, where the respondents ask to rate their level of agreement with a series of statements about the brand. And these are all customized, of course, to reflect your brand's identity, your brand's industry target audience needs. So, and the brand image score here is calculated as an average of the various ratings. Following brand image, we have brand attributes. What does your audience get out of engaging with your brand? The rating system here is usually a 5-point rating scale of strongly agree to strongly disagree. And in this particular case, we're talking about specific benefits or attributes associated with your brand. So it keeps me informed about industry research and development. It helps me make decisions about how to run my business, and so on. Now, what we normally do with these two metrics, the brand image and brand attributes, is we tie them together into the satisfaction metrics mentioned earlier and incorporate some more advanced analytics such as correlation and regression analysis. And this gives us the key drivers that continue to feed those satisfaction ratings. The last piece of brand health is competitive analysis. And so how does your brand compare to your competition? Which competing brands are being accessed and at what rate and for what reason? And depending on your particular industry and how wide the field of competitors is to your brand, this part's normally done independent of the previous parts. And it's often conducted blind, as in the respondents don't know who the study's coming from. And it often goes to a wider industry list to assess the real competitive threat there. So why did we do all this with brand health assessment? It was basically to know that we're on solid footing and can handle a shift to the paywall without losing subscribers to competition. So we're at the second part of our assessment, content needs. And the content needs assessment is aptly named. We're assessing what your audience's content needs are. And this objective is broken down to two parts. The two parts are topics of interest and types of information accessed. And I'll explain in more detail. In the areas of topics of interest, what we have is which content topics are being accessed. How frequently are they being accessed? How important are these topics to the respondent's work? How satisfied are they with the quantity and quality of the coverage of these topics? And often this piece is combined with the competitive assessment part through an independent industry list. Again, because it helps not only to know what topics of yours folks are into, but what industry topics in general your audience is accessing. Again, what we're looking for here is opportunity. We're looking for opportunities to deliver content that offers value and justifies that paywall. Here are some examples of topics of interest. In this particular case, this is from a study of the insurance industry. And as you can see, cyber risks and workman's comp are tied as the #1 topic accessed regularly. Here's another chart showing these same topics accessed in rank order, only this time by job function. So risk manager, benefits manager, insurer, and so on. And here's yet another chart of topics by level of web access, as in the difference between a frequent web user and an infrequent web user. So by doing this, we've covered topics of content access and the frequency of accessing. But one of the more important parts of this objective is looking at how important these topics are to respondents while considering how well the topics are being delivered on. So importance versus satisfaction. So we do this with a quadrant analysis. Generally, it's a two-part question where we give respondents a list of topics, a list of variables, and ask them to rate the importance of those topics, as well as their satisfaction with the quality and quantity of the coverage of those topics. And what we end up with is a chart with 4 quadrants that helps guide us to an appropriate allocation of your resources, right? So where should you be focusing your attention first, second, third, and so on? If you look at this particular quadrant right here, anything that falls into the upper left-hand quadrant, that's high importance, lower satisfaction. So these are going to be your main areas of focus. It's going to want to where you're going to put in your primary efforts. To the right of that, top right quadrant, that's high importance, high satisfaction. These are areas where you are delivering and delivering well, and you got to keep that up. A lower priority is the lower left-hand quadrant. That's lower importance, lower satisfaction. And then the lower right-hand quadrant. This is an area where perhaps these topics are getting too much of your limited resources, and you might want to allocate them elsewhere. So this gives you a very good look at where and how to allocate your resources most effectively. Now that was topics of information. Now let's look at types of information. And that sounds similar, but it's not the same thing. What do I mean by types of information? We're talking about things like breaking news, industry trends, special reports, industry data, and so on. And in this chart, we're looking at the frequency that these types of information are being accessed. So daily, a couple times a week, once a month. And an even more important question is about the platforms on which these types of information are being accessed. In this chart, they're ranked the top 3, namely the website, e-newsletters, the print publication. So what this is about is where are people accessing breaking news? And where would they want to be accessing breaking news? On this slide, we're looking at more of these types of information accessed according to strictly digital platforms, such as the e-newsletter and apps. So why did we do this second part? If we're going to be charging, we need to know what kind of content they're willing to pay for and how they prefer to access it. And remember, it needs to be important enough for them to justify the value of paying for this. So that brings us to the third and last part of our pre-paywall implementation research, and that's pricing. How much can we price this at? Now there are a few different pricing tolerance study methodologies that one can implement, but a simple and effective one is the Van Westendorp price sensitivity meter. And it basically consists of a series of questions that establish an ideal price point and then a range of acceptable pricing around that ideal price point in case it's not financially viable. So this helps your brand gauge your audience's pricing tolerance and find that sweet spot for where you'd like to price the paywall. So you've made it. You've done your due diligence. You've informed yourselves on what the audience likes and dislikes about your brand and how to best compete with other sources of similar information. So what the audience wants, how they want it, how much they're willing to pay for it. And you've implemented your paywall. You have a new source of revenue. Congratulations. Who's better than you? So now we need to keep it. And that brings us to monitoring. And that's the fun part. You see, with new revenue streams are going to come new responsibilities. You're no longer just in the ad revenue business. You're also in a subscription model business now. And as such, you need to incorporate some customer experience monitoring that data companies and e-commerce companies, subscription-based businesses, and member organizations implement. So as I just noted, this type of audience experience monitoring is what's required for data subscription services, which a lot of media brands are expanding into these days, e-commerce, which is becoming more and more, which is being explored more and more by consumer media brands, events, which are of course a huge moneymaker, and putting content behind a paywall, which is what we're talking about today. So this type of monitoring has to become a key part of today's media brand, whether you're engaging in one or more of these business endeavors. And what that really means is that from now on, every member of your audience matters, because every one of them is giving you money for one thing or another. Whereas they used to be your product, your audience was your product that you were selling to your advertisers, and they still are to a degree. But now your audience is also your customer. And you need to make sure that each and every one of them is satisfied, because it's a lot easier and cheaper to keep your current customers than it is to go out and find new ones. So audience experience now needs to be at the center of your media brand, and so that it can inform and drive the objectives in all the different departments in your organization. It can help you build and nurture your relationships with your subscribers and measure and track subscriber satisfaction, yield rich, actionable feedback about your products and services and content, increase subscriber advocacy and referrals, predict growth and attrition, and most importantly, it will alert you to unsatisfied subscribers before they compromise your reputation and your renewals. So it gives you that opportunity to block and tackle, which is a major help when it comes to renewals, which is now going to be a part of your business. And this might sound like a lot. It's not. Nowadays, a lot of it's automated. You just need software to conduct this type of monitoring, a CX platform, or in your case, an audience experience platform. At Signet Research, we recommend our own. We have a product called Sybil, and you can use an open API to pass information to and from your CRM and your marketing software, so that you can trigger short, unobtrusive surveys across all of the different touch points of your media brand. So web pop-ups on your website, social media embeds on your social media pages. You can, of course, do live things at events, or SMS text messaging for conferences. All the touch points where your subscribers engage with you, the most important being email, of course. And our recommendation when it comes to this type of monitoring is normally a short survey, NPS being the main metric, and we often bring back the appropriate KPIs that we used in the original brand health study. So that brings us full circle to continue to trend and track and monitor your new subscribers and your brand health in an easy, cost-effective way. Now I'm going to pass this on to Joe May of ProFarmer, who is using Sybil and doing just that. Joe?
All right, thanks guys. And again, my name is Joe May. I'm the marketing director with ProFarmer. And as Matt mentioned, we are the paid content division of Farm Journal. One slight correction with that, though, ProFarmer is not new, but we are using this new technology to help engage and retain, our customers. We've actually been the suburban, slightly overweight Russell Crowe that we saw in Dean and Byron's presentation since 1973. But we've just partnered with Sybil earlier this year, so we are fairly new to this process. But we're live with the platform and are really excited about how we can use it with our retention efforts. So I'm going to share the challenges that ProFarmer faces in retaining our customers, how we implemented the Net Promoter Score, or you may hear me refer to it as the NPS survey process, into our retention plan, and then also our future strategy for continuous communication and measurement using the Net Promoter Scores. First, just a little bit about ProFarmer. We're an ag media company, entirely subscriber supported, and we call our subscribers members. So we have no advertising in our print newsletter, no advertising on our website. It is a paywall gated site. No advertising on our email or mobile services. And our content is focused on commodity markets, ag policy, and the analysis of those. So we don't recommend, what brand of tractor you should buy or what type of seed you should plant, but we will send alerts if market conditions are favorable, for farmers to sell some of their crop. So we are a business-focused service used primarily by farmers who need this information to be successful with their farms. And the issue that we face, which I'm sure some of you do too, is that we don't know how our members or subscribers really feel about us, until it comes to renewal time. And we have strong renewal rates, but it's also a process that we can be guilty of setting it on cruise control. And when that happens, we overlook what our members are really trying to tell us. Publishers, they often don't know that a customer is unhappy until that customer either cancels or simply doesn't renew. So our goal is to identify our at-risk members earlier in this process. So that will give us the opportunity to fix any issues they may be experiencing. So that way we don't have to wait for them to actually expire and find out how they're feeling about us. So this is, a short look at how our sales process is historically. We make the sale. 2 weeks after the sale, we do a check-in into the customer's purchase, make sure that they're, using the tools available to them, see if they have any questions, make sure everything is accessible to them. 6 months later, we give them an upsell message if they qualify for that. Then our renewal cycle begins approximately 6 weeks prior to their expiration date. And the problem with that is that after the check-in, we're really not receiving any feedback, positive or negative, from our customers until renewal time. So they're basically, wandering the desert alone, and we're assuming if we don't get a complaint from them that things are okay. And then when we get to that renewal time, if the customer renews, great, we treat it as a positive. They must be happy with us. If they don't renew and expire, well, then that's a negative, who then goes into our save process, which is extremely difficult because by this time, the customer has already made a conscious decision to not renew with us. So trying to save them is hard, and it usually requires giving them a lower price, a lower rate, or an increased level of service. So even if we do save that customer, they're typically less valuable to us in terms of revenue as they were before. So we really need to identify this segment of customers earlier in their life cycle. And that's where the NPS, or Net Promoter Scores, comes into play. We implemented it to start conversations with our members prior to the renewal cycle, which does two really important things for us. Number one, it gives us real-time feedback on how our members are viewing us, both at an individual level and as an aggregate. And number two, it gives our members a sense of importance in that we're asking their opinion. Because people love to share their ideas. You just have to ask them for it. I do have a couple of tips I wanted to share at this stage. Number one, stay small, because you will be tempted to add additional questions. I guarantee somebody on your team will say, hey, if we're sending a survey, let's add this question, or let's also ask them this. That way we won't have to send it again later. But don't do it. Stay focused on what the goal is for your NPS survey here. And then have a plan on what you're going to do with the feedback. Know how you'll utilize those results before you send the survey and those results start pouring in. And as Byron had mentioned, the Net Promoter Score is divided into three categories: promoters, neutrals, and detractors. And you can see the question that we ask on the right side of the screen, and it's really simple. How likely are you, on a scale of 0 to 10, how likely are you to recommend ProFarmer to a colleague or peer if you had the opportunity to do so? And we embedded that question directly in email, so they didn't have to click a link and then be taken to a different page. They could answer that question directly from the email. And then anybody who answered 0 to 6, we asked a follow-up question simply asking, how could we have done better? Anyone who answered 7 to 10 received a follow-up question that said, why did you give this score? And that was it. That was the full survey right there, those two questions. But what they did is both of those follow-up questions, they were open text responses. So that gives us a true sense of what our members are concerned about. It's an open forum of sorts for them, and also what they find most valuable. And it's somewhat time-saving for us as well, because the text responses can be grouped and filtered into a report, which easily identifies the recurring terms for us, so we can see which concerns are really rising to the top. But of course, getting all this data is great, but unless you have a plan to use it, it's going to waste. So again, I want to stress it again, have a plan of how you're going to use that data before you send your survey. So our plan, when this data came back to us, was to target specific subsegments within the results. Because it's our belief that it's going to be really difficult to move somebody who rated us a 0 all the way up to the promoter level, to a 9 or a 10. So our focus is on the segments just on the cusp of moving up. How do we move a 7 or an 8 up to a 9 or 10? How do we move a 5 or a 6 up to a 7 or 8? And, we don't ignore the other scores, but you do need to target each message for each segment accordingly. Your lower detractors need to know that they're heard and no action is being taken, while your promoters, your 9s and 10s, they need to feel super valuable and important, or as my 8th grade business teacher, Mr. Bell, he said, make them feel warm and fuzzy. And when you craft your messages, it's important to be direct when addressing the issue. Our first survey resulted in multiple concerns from those text responses about user logins and passwords to our website. So what we did was proactively remind our users the basics, how to reset their password, how to set their browser to remember their credentials, so they don't have to enter it every single time. And that's a simple action that we probably all take for granted, but for our audience, 50 years old is considered a young farmer. And we can have, our age range can go anywhere from, a farmer in their 20s to a farmer in their 80s. So it's a wide breadth there. And it can be a major issue for some of them. But if reminding them these simple reminders and how-tos is all it takes to move a score from a 4 to a 7, that's going to result in a measurable retention increase for us. And so in our messaging, we simplified it as much as possible. We included screenshots, a step-by-step process on how to reset the password, reminded them of the benefits that they receive by using the website so they know it's worthwhile to log in, and then just encouraging them to make full use of the resources and tools included with their membership. Because we all know an engaged customer is most likely a retained customer. And lastly, we need to re-survey our audience 3 to 4 times a year just to determine if our responses are acceptable and being received by our audience. And that will also give us the opportunity to identify any new issues that may pop up that we need to proactively address. And of course, the real value of the NPS survey is monitoring your audience over time. We've only done the one NPS survey so far. It was in mid-February when we launched it. But when our second survey is deployed, as we were talking about, we can't just hope for better results. Between surveys 1 and 2, you have to address the concerns that came to light in the first survey. So our plan includes tracking it down all the way to the individual level. So we can determine if our high-risk users, those who were the detractors, feel their concerns have been addressed. And we'll also monitor the text analytics to see if our response to the previous issues resulted in fewer listed concerns. So with our proactive response to the web login issue, we hope to see less of those popping up in those text responses when we launch our second survey. And again, lastly, don't ignore your promoters. Continue to remind them, how you're helping them, deliver them a warm and fuzzy, so they remain a promoter throughout their entire subscription with you. And we did leave some time for questions. I wanted to put my email address on the screen in case anyone wants to contact me, offline or have anything, that pops up later in mind. But yeah, that's how we're using Net Promoter Scores at ProFarmer.
All right. Thanks, Joe. So basically, in summary, what we've gone over is you've got the brand health assessment, and why are we doing this? So that we know our brand's on solid footing, to know what drives the satisfaction and the loyalty, and to know where you stand versus your competitors. Then you've got your content needs assessment to drill down and find the opportunities in the topics and the types of information and how they want to be accessed. And then finally you have your pricing to establish a price point. And then there's the monitoring piece, using some sort of an audience experience platform to monitor customer loyalty and satisfaction and track KPIs to ensure renewals. And you can conduct this research internally if you have the bandwidth to do so. You can reach out to a third-party research provider. Signet would be happy to help. Depending on your needs, we can work in different ways, whether it's on a consultation basis or setting up your department and helping you do the research yourself. So there's many different ways to go about it. And again, the monitoring piece is now kind of a central need for media brands moving into any new revenue sources outside of traditional advertising. So these are the tools that will enable you to get out there and claim victory. And we wish you luck. And thanks for listening. And
all right,
for questions.
Great. Exactly. Folks, at this point, we're going to open it up for questions. You have two ways you can ask a question. One, you can type your question in the Q&A tab in the lower left-hand corner of your screen and address that to all co-presenters. Or you can unmute your phone line, hit *7, and you'll be able to ask your question over the phone. We do have several questions lined up already. Guys, I think the first question may be directed to Joe, but I'd like everyone to answer that. Maybe Joe can talk specifically about this in terms of ProFarmer, and then Byron and Dean, you guys can talk about this more as a range across your clients. The question is, what response level do you get to your NPS survey?
Sure, I'll start that. So we received about 11% of our total email send that we went out to responded. But when we actually look at the percent of users who are engaged with the website, because we do have a lot of our members who they basically join us just to get the printed newsletter because they're not web savvy or don't use the website. We still send them the survey. We want to give them an opportunity because they do have an email address. But so it's 11% out of our entire audience. But when we look at it based on our active web customers, that went up about 4 times.
All right, excellent. Dean, Byron, any additional input from you guys? Any ranges that you can offer across your client base?
That sounded about right. It ranges, response rate ranges as high as up to 25% in some very, very well responded to associations and corresponding magazines. It really depends. Everyone's different. Every industry is different, and the way they work with your brands are all different. So Joe's answer is pretty common.
All right, terrific. We've got another question. I think we'd like each of our speakers to weigh in on this. The question is, have you measured success on paywall conversions with on-site messaging versus other channel marketing like email?
All right, so this is Byron again. You're talking about the messaging on an actual website as opposed to via email. We haven't at the moment had finished studies on this. The paywall process has been pretty new for most of us, but we are going to be monitoring this on an ongoing basis, and we'd like to continue with more case studies to show this moving forward.
One of the great things that Byron covered is that quadrant study where you could actually see what are the points that are going to really resonate with the audience. So from my perspective, it's really how do you message that they're going to really pick up on it. The other deliverables are secondary.
All right, very good. Guys, next question for the group. How do you delineate between a subscription strategy versus a membership strategy? They're similar but not the same.
Yeah. So it's really benefits. So let's look at the subscription strategy as traditionally a relationship based on, are you getting the print title, how much access you're getting off of the website, maybe it's a library of content, some plans, some ebooks and things like that. Where the membership side, you're going much more deep into their business. Some are offering an extreme, which is some insurance benefits, but really like discounting, special relationships with your advertiser base. Perhaps, I've seen this work really well, is special rates for events and sometimes freebies to the events as a result of being a member. So it's really a deeper brand relationship.
Yeah, I can second that too from what Dean had mentioned. With ProFarmer, our members will receive pretty steep discounts if they want to purchase basically a one-off, which would be a cross sale, which we consider, or attend one of our events. They get discounted rates, but we also they get more of an experience with us. They're invited to call up one of our editors or one of our analysts at any time if they have a question. For example, if we advise to sell 10% of your corn crop, and one of our members has a question as far as what kind of thinking went behind that recommendation, they're welcome to call us up, and we'll put them on the phone with one of our analysts to explain that in more detail for them.
All right, very good. Just a reminder, our audience, you can submit your question in the Q&A tab in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. We do have several questions queued up, so please get it in now so we can get it in before we're out of time. Next question is specifically to Joe. Did ProFarmer have to make pricing adjustments once you launched the paywall?
We did. Just in a brief history, we've always had a paywall. But prior to last year, it was very rigid. It was a yes, no, in or out type of paywall. The paywall we launched last year gives us a lot more flexibility, so we're able to do different pricing tests and options both as far as pricing and for length of service that prospects can buy from us.
All right, good. Next question I think is directed to Joe, but I'd like all our speakers to weigh in on this. Byron and Dean, you may have some anecdotal examples to share about this, but the question is, what feedback were you most surprised by?
Yeah, the answers to a survey are always interesting. As far as being surprised, it's probably beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but we would have such a mix of some of our promoters would say the reason they gave us a 9 or a 10 was because they like the advice that we issued. It fit their business plan and helped them. And then we would have detractors that would give us a score below 5 that would say your advice is horrible. You cost me money last year. Same advice, same thing, but there'd be like a 6 or 7 point differential in the ratings. So that was probably the biggest surprise. A lot of the responses weren't a surprise to us because we do have an active call center that we use. So we're in constant contact with our members and with prospects. So that allows us to kind of keep our fingers on the pulse of what is important to the people we're contacting. So we try to stay up to date on that and message appropriately to that. But seeing that dichotomy of responding to the exact same thing with those different scores was probably the biggest surprise.
Joe, I like the example. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sure. So from overall clients, and what we've found is some surprises is content usually where they're banking, let's say it's a newspaper, on local news and local sports to be the key driver of a paid relationship, only to find out other areas of content are more significant, like the coupons and the inserts. And also delivery, home delivery for newspapers, on what their expectation is on how that relationship's going, and then the actual customer not enjoying it. For magazines, that's very similar. The features and content requests, a little different than originally thought.
Okay, good. I just want to ask a question that actually builds on this. Jill, I liked your example earlier of how when you did the survey initially, you got some feedback that on clarifying or making the process for logging in a little easier was able to kind of improve your scores. Were there any other quick wins that you were able to discover with this?
There were some. Basically, it was simple reminders on different pieces of content. Like when we issue a special report, we just made it a point based on some of the comments we received that people want to be notified a little bit further out of when these reports are going to be available to them, so they can kind of plan around it. So there are some little things like that where you read it and you're like, oh yeah, we can do that tomorrow. It's really easy. So yeah, that part is really helpful as well. And our audience, historically is pretty open to sharing their thoughts. We do get a lot of honest feedback, both good and bad, which is needed. That's the purpose of these surveys. So, and we do read every single, text response. We don't just look at it as an aggregate and say, okay, 45 people mentioned, had this term included with it. We'll read through line by line every single response to make sure that our members are heard.
All right, good. We have a few more questions here. Again, I think this is a question for all our speakers. What do you think about an auto renewal strategy? Why don't we start with Byron and Dean, and then we can hear from Joe on this.
Sure. I'm a fan of the auto renewal strategy. It seems that it's popular, and the reason it seems to be popular is because that whole adage, it's better to ask forgiveness than permission, seems to apply well in this case. Individuals that are often off-put by the auto renewal can be spoken to, and you can make good on that. Often it's actually substantially more convenient. Most folks that are going to be subscribed are going to want to continue. Your attrition rates, for the most part, should be substantially lower. And generally that is the direction most folks have been going in. We also recommend shooting out a survey generally around 4 months before renewal time, giving you the opportunity to reach out to folks that may be less than satisfied and respond to them, try to get them back in and try to fix whatever the problems might be.
I would add to it, a focus should be in addition to those that opt out of the subscription and how you handle that, because they're leaving doesn't mean they're gone forever. So customer care, what kind of messaging you send after that is going to be really, really important. It should be a big focus.
And I can talk just a little bit about that auto renew as well, because we just started offering auto renew last summer, so probably about 9 months ago, in conjunction with the new paywall we launched on our website. And we had a lot of hesitations when we first launched it. We weren't sure if our audience would be receptive to it or not. And when we first launched, we were not getting many conversions to auto renew. But what we found is that it almost entirely depended on how it was presented to the customer. The majority of our sales still come through our call center over the phone. And we found out our sales team was basically positioning it as once they made the sale, they would ask, would you like to put that on auto renew so you're automatically charged each month or each year, depending on their choice. And almost every customer would say, no, I don't want to do that. Just send me a renewal. So when we changed the messaging to promote it as a benefit, and basically the assumed close where we'd say, okay, we've got you signed up. It's $40 a month. Your credit card will be charged on the 30th of each month. Thank you very much. You're started right now. And then since that time, our auto renew rates have been through the roof, and not a surprise, the retention of these auto renew customers are really strong.
All right, good. Guys, we have several more questions here. I would like to get them in before we're out of time. Next question, and again, I'd like to have all our speakers chime in on this. Have you found a tipping point in regards to engagement metrics where an audience member is most likely to convert?
As far as a tipping point, if you're looking for an actual metric, it really does range depending on who we're talking to and who the organization is and what the brand is all about. But it is probably one of the highest indicators of a successful conversion is high engagement rates. Of course, this has to be also cross-referenced with what the competition looks like and how what you're going to be delivering. But yes, engagement rates is one of the biggest predictors. So high engagement rates goes a long way. I can pass it on to maybe Joe has some specific.
Yeah, and we have not found that point yet. Obviously it's something that we're working towards to pinpoint those segments, but we do not have those actual metrics yet that we can fall back on.
All right, and this next question I think is directed to Joe, and you may have the same difficulty answering this, but the question is, have your renewal rates increased since implementing the surveys?
No, they haven't yet, and the reason being there just hasn't been enough time. We just launched the survey in February, and the majority of our memberships are annuals, so it'll be a year from now we'll be able to have a really strong answer to that question. But yeah, at this point it's just too early.
All right, and let's make this next one the last question. Again, certainly I think this is directed to Joe, but would love to have Dean and Byron weigh in on this as well. What kind of customer service infrastructure is needed to properly execute a paid relationship? Do you guarantee response times, et cetera, in-house or outsource?
Well, ProFarmer's customer service is outsourced with a really strong partner of ours that we've been working with for 20-some years. And it's basically all of our inbound calls are directed there, all of our inbound emails are directed there, and we have weekly, if not multiple weekly calls with that team to make sure that our message is being relayed properly to the members they're speaking with. But we do give them a pretty long rope too. You have to trust that group that you're working with, if you outsource it, can correctly portray your brand and your message that you want. So that's the thing you really have to monitor. And we're kind of lucky that the group we partner with is only about 90 miles from our office. So we do go over there monthly or maybe every 2 months just to have some FaceTime with them and keep that personal touch so that they basically remember who we are and keep promoting our message to our members and the prospects, because they're the ones that talk to our members. They're basically from our members' perspective, that customer service person is ProFarmer. That's the face of the company. So it's really important to make sure you get the right people you're working with in that role.
I would just add that if you have a good partner you can outsource it to, that's great. If you're doing it in-house, that's great. It's important to try to mimic the model that's used for the most part with subscription-based, a lot of SaaS platform companies and of course a lot of commerce companies where The customer service department is basically centralized. It's a couple of individuals that are going to be receiving all of this information and passing it out to the appropriate departments and individuals in the organization who can respond and who can affect change. I think it's also important to trigger some automatic responses for certain types of responses that come in. Of course, you can trigger automatic sends back to the individual saying, we hear you, we'll be getting back to you within the next 24 hours or something, just to give you a little bit of room.
All right, very good. Well, folks, thank you very much. I want to thank our speakers. Excellent job. I want to thank our audience. Terrific Q&A. Thank you for your participation. A recording and deck of this presentation will be sent out to all registrants probably a little later today. Before we let you go, I just want to run through a couple quick things coming up with Connectiv. On May 9th, for those of you in the Mid-Atlantic area, we're going to be hosting a Lunch and Learn in Washington, D.C. On best practices around social media. We've got some speakers from the B2B side, the consumer side from Vox, and also Association Media. We're running this with our sister association, AM&P. So if you are in the Mid-Atlantic area, it's certainly worth your time to check out. The Connectiv Executive Summit will be held May 14th to May 16th in Charleston, South Carolina. And then at the end of May, May 23rd, we've got a webinar featuring winners from the 2019 Neal Awards, which is Connectiv's awards recognizing the best in B2B content. And they're going to be talking about the new journalism, sharing best practices and tips for the winning entries in podcasts, infographics, data content, social media, and more. So I listed some links there. Please check that out. Pass that on to any of your colleagues who may be interested. Again, thanks to our speakers. Thanks to our audience. We'll be sending out an archive shortly. And this concludes the webinar.